Hey everyone, I hope you guys are all having a great day. Today I'm going to talk about the books that I have read by Liane Moriarty. So I have read 5 books by Liane Moriarty. I have thoroughly enjoyed most of them, and I was surprised by how much I enjoy Liane Moriarty books because when you look at the covers and where they're located when you go shopping, it kind of seems like they're just super chick lit. And I was offended by that. I guess I was offended by the fact that I might enjoy it, which is silly and labely and unimportant. But I received Big Little Lies 2 years ago for Christmas and read it in January of 2019, and I loved it. I could not believe how much I enjoyed that story, how well written it was. And so after that, I read What Alice Forgot. And those were the only 2 books of Liane Moriarty I read that year. But then when quarantine happened, I decided to listen to The Husband's Secret on audiobook, and I was just hooked, and I devoured 2 more Liane Moriarty books during quarantine as well. Truly Madly Guilty and 9 Perfect Strangers. So those are the 5 books that I have read by Liane Moriarty. I think that she's published 9 so far, but those are the 5 that I have read. One of the things that I think Liane Moriarty excels at is taking common issues, everyday issues, and examining them through the lens of multiple perspectives to give us a very complex look at an issue that we might think is very straightforward. And sometimes it can get uncomfortable, and I really appreciate how she does that with humor as well. She looks at these really intense issues and also has me laughing the entire time, which may be a little inappropriate. I'm not sure. What do you think? But I love Liane Moriarty books. Not only do I think that they are poignant, but they are also really funny most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. What I'm going to do next is rank the 5 Liane Moriarty books that I have read and tell you a brief summary about them, what I liked about them, and what I didn't like about them, if there was anything. So coming in at number 5 was What Alice Forgot. This is about a middle-aged woman who gets in an accident at a spin class and loses like 20 years of her memories. Less than that, maybe like 12 years. She forgets that she's getting a divorce. She forgets her children, and she just thinks of herself as this 20-something happily married woman about to have her first child. And she wakes up and she can't understand what's happened to her life. And so in this book, Liane Moriarty is examining marriages, female friendships, the relationships between siblings, the relationship between parents and children. But there's another character in the book who can't have kids and is struggling through IVF. So that is looked at in depth as well, which Liane Moriarty tends to do. That's come up in several of her books. I did appreciate that this book was funny. Especially at the beginning when she's in the spin class and she's waking up and it's just so ridiculous, but it gets serious pretty quickly. I didn't actually like the IVF story. I can't have kids, and so stumbling upon this in the storyline was a lot for me during the time that I read it. And I also didn't like the ending of the IVF story in particular. I thought it was disappointing and lacked elements of truth that you just have to deal with sometimes if you struggle with infertility. So that came in as number 5 for me, definitely the least impressive of the Liane Moriarty books that I have read. Coming in at number 4 is Truly Madly Guilty. This book takes place, it's kind of dual timelines. You have present day timeline in Australia where it's raining and life is miserable. And then you have a couple of weeks before that where 3 couples went to a barbecue and their lives are completely altered because of a couple of things that happened at that barbecue. I liked the dual timelines. I thought that was a nice way to play out and allow us to figure out what happened. And it was a nice way to just sort of keep the plot moving smoothly. This book examines female friendships again, and infertility again, but it also looks at guilt, as you might notice by the title. But something happens at this barbecue and each of the characters feels guilty in their own way, and they deal with it in different ways, and they have to come to terms with it in their own ways as well. I liked the way that she examined guilt and those friendships. I really liked that one of the characters was the daughter of a hoarder. It made her a very unique and interesting character to read about. Liane Moriarty really dives into the complexities of friendships, especially friendships where you become friends at a very young age, and that friendship lasts until adulthood, but you guys might not actually be friends had you met as adults because life has treated you very differently and you're very different people. So the complexities of those friendships. I also appreciated the way that she dealt with sex in this book and how it's a very taboo subject to discuss, and kind of what that means for us as a culture because it's taboo, and what that can do to our relationships and our friendships. One of the main characters, Clementine, is a cellist, and she is struggling in her marriage. At the beginning of the story, their marriage seems perfect, but something happens at this barbecue, and she and her husband both feel guilty about it. And so their marriage is in conflict. I didn't really appreciate how quickly that conflict was resolved. I didn't think Clementine's character growth felt natural. The next book I'm going to talk about, the one ranking number 3 for me, was The Husband's Secret. This is a story of 3 families that are linked because of a somewhat hidden tragedy. And Liane Moriarty introduces you to the 3 women in particular, and she introduces you to their family, and she intertwines their stories, and you find out that there was a murder years and years ago, and essentially the story is a whodunit, but you find out whodunit halfway through the book. The second half of the story is each of the characters coming to terms with and figuring out how to deal with this new revelation. I loved how she dealt with grief. I loved her children's characters in this book. And I loved how she focused on the consequences of even the smallest impulse choices that we make in our lives. One aspect of the book that I didn't enjoy was one of the little girls in the book is just in love with the Berlin Wall for one reason or another at this point in her life. She's a very curious child. She likes to research things, and at this point she's researching the Berlin Wall, and Liane Moriarty sort of uses that as symbolism throughout the story, and it felt forced. It didn't feel natural. It was kind of like she was looking for something that might symbolize a divide, and she chose the Berlin Wall. So for me, that didn't work naturally, although perhaps some people would have really enjoyed it. I just didn't. The book coming in number 2 for me was Big Little Lies, and I just loved that book, as I've said earlier. This is a book that intertwines the stories of 3 women who come to know each other because their kids are in the same kindergarten class. And we again have we have 2 timelines. One of the timelines is getting to know these 3 women, and the other timeline is the night of a murder. And the unique thing about this book was that you don't know who is murdered until later on in the story. I really enjoyed the way that she played with the timeline in order to create a whodunit story in a totally different format. Maybe not totally different for everybody, but it was new to me and I thought it was great. This story is wicked funny, again, but it's also about sexual abuse in and out of marriages, the complexities of abuse on children and how parental choices affect the children in the relationship. And it's also about female friendships and the complexities of those friendships, what it means to be a mom, what people think of moms and the drama that surrounds that. And then also it's about a murder. So I really enjoyed the way that Liane Moriarty wrote that story. And I actually don't have any negatives. I guess some people might not like the ending, but I appreciated it. And the whole thing worked very well for me. I gave it 5 stars, I'm pretty sure. And then finally, for me, my #1 book that I have read by Liane Moriarty is 9 Perfect Strangers. I actually originally had this in as #2 and Big Little Lies as #1, but I changed my mind. 9 Perfect Strangers is definitely my favorite, and I'm not going to feel ashamed of that. So this book is about 9 people who embark on a healing journey by going to a kind of a hippie health resort at a wellness spa, essentially, and it's about their time at that wellness spa. They're there for 10 days, and you get a very close look at each of those characters, what's going on in their lives, and how they are trying to heal from it. I loved this story. The main character is an author, so Liane Moriarty is writing about an author as her main character, and she goes all out. She's making fun of authors. She's talking about the problems that authors have dealing with reviews and writing new stories and how they're criticized for writing the same old thing. Especially in Liane Moriarty's case, I could see how this criticism could really hit home for her because her stories do tend to have nice, tidy endings, and she's telling us through this book that she's okay with that. That's a story she wants to write. And not all of her stories have happy endings, but they tend to. I enjoyed every character in this book. As I said, I really liked the author character. But the other thing that I think Liane Moriarty did especially well in this story is taking a look at the male characters. It's not something she tends to focus on. She's definitely writing about women and women issues, but she nails it this time when she's talking about some of the male characters, particularly Tony. She really deals with shame that men feel and how it affects them, and that's not something that we tend to talk about in our culture. I think that many modern Americans think that men don't have feelings and men don't have emotions, but they do indeed, and Liane Moriarty is examining that through this story. I also thought this story was very funny in the way that the wellness retreat just goes badly. The woman in charge of the wellness retreat, you get her whole backstory. She is a Russian immigrant and she is dealing with her own trauma from her past, and she's not dealing with it very well. And she's trying to heal these people with all kinds of new techniques, and it goes really poorly, actually. But Liane Moriarty writes about all of this with depth, feeling, and humor. And I think that some people might not like this book because there are some cliches in it, and it's a little bit meta and silly, but Liane Moriarty is doing that on purpose, and that's what I loved about it. She is not taking herself too seriously in this book, and it really pays off for me as a reader. So, I would love to know which Liane Moriarty books you have read and which ones are your favorites. Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks, guys. Bye.